Now, we've talked a lot about if Colby's weight is on this leg or this one that I've got secured, and that being typically more favorable for him. If I can't get the weight on this leg, or for some reason he transfers or in his motion he settles back on this leg, I can chop to a double like we've done already and talked about. Alternatively, I can come up. Remember, if his weight is here, it's difficult for me to come up to my feet. But if his weight is over here, it's not that hard for me to come up to my feet. So I can go and transition to that double as we did initially, or I can come up high to our feet. So, I'm in on Colby here. Now his weight was on this foot, again, which is what he wants, but I would say I was able to manipulate it further, or through our scrambling, I felt him shift this weight to this far leg. As soon as he does, I can shift it further, and I can come up. You'll notice my position here. Around his waist, up his crotch. I'm going to try to control this leg with my pinching my knees, but notice my feet aren't close together. They're farther apart for stability. We can do a couple things in here. One of them is going to be a lift. I'm in this position. I feel that transition of weight. Instead of chopping off to a double, I come up to my feet. If we're in a position that's more static, in other words, I can finish the double here if I want, but if we're in a position that's more static, sometimes I'll grab here, especially if I want to throw. Again, I'm pinching up the crotch and the back, around the waist or upper part of the hip. My head is up high. I'm out to the side. His weight is on this far leg. That makes it such, as we discussed with the double leg, much more difficult for him to be able to get a guillotine on me here. That's very difficult from this position to get it effective. Because even if he comes up here, I can lift up and I can bring him down, which we'll go over momentarily. Once I've gotten up to my feet, my preference is to continue with a chop and a double while keeping the weight heavy on the foot or of the leg that I'm chopping. Again, the more weight I put on the leg that I'm chopping, the more difficult it is for him to be able to hop and to be able to compensate and be mobile and defend against it. If I put a lot of weight here and chop, it's much harder for him to be able to compensate, to be able to retreat, and I'm more likely to be able to overtake him and chop his leg down and get on top. Now, one point I want to make here. When I switch off from my outside single to the double, or when I'm in the double leg to begin with, when I chop, for example, particularly when I'm on my feet, I want you to notice that when I chop, not only am I putting Colby's weight on his far leg, or the leg that's far relative to me, as I chop, my weight is mostly on that mirrored leg as well. That's important. I'm never trying to chop and drive with my weight back here. When I chop, my weight transfers to the leg that's near his far leg. And that's a very important point, because I'm never trying to pull his legs in. I'm trying to chop his leg and drive through it. That necessitates me to transfer my weight as I do that. So when I transfer the weight and I chop, I'm not just chopping and kind of pushing with my weight still far on this leg, or mostly on this leg. When I chop, I don't have a lot of weight on this leg for the moment. I'm going to keep driving, but most of my weight is on the leg opposite that I'm chopping. And that's an important point, I think, that'll help you continue your momentum and your weight through your opponent. That also, because my weight is down on this leg, makes it easier to get my weight down on my opponent's leg, which makes it more difficult for him to be able to jump to get away. So I'll be more likely to overtake him. So for me to get the weight on his leg, it's critical that the weight is on my leg that's opposite the leg that I'm chopping of his. So the alternative would be to lift. Once I'm in this position, from having transferred the weight on my outside single all the way up to the double leg, I can come to this type of position here. I'm going to keep my head up high. I'm going to keep the arm up through the crotch, and I'm around the waist, tight. There's a lot of contact all throughout my upper body. My face, my knees are pinched pinching his leg and controlling it, yet my legs, or rather my feet, are at some distance as opposed to right next to each other, so that I have a little bit better base. Now from here, my preference is simply to lower this hand around the waist to the knee and to lower my weight as I chop. I don't just want to go laterally, because if I just bounce laterally, from here, if I just block and I'm driving laterally, he's still probably going to be able to defend or to compensate or retreat by lifting his leg up and hopping, so that I won't be able to take him down, or at least it'll be more difficult. So what's crucial is for me to keep the weight very heavy on this leg, and I do that from here by sagging down and driving through. I shouldn't have to have much excursion or much distance to overtake him. If his weight is heavy and planted, that should be a fairly simple matter, and I want to overtake him very quickly. So the key point is to keep the weight heavy as I chop the leg. I do that by lowering my level. I don't do that by lowering my upper body. I do that by lowering my level, my hips. Once more. So I'm in this position here. I'm in tight, my head is up. I'm going to drop to the knee from here. I lower my level and I drive through. And you'll notice too that I'm at an angle as I'm driving. I'm driving straight, but that straight drive motion of mine is laterally from his perspective. So I'm basically driving at a plane or a line through both of his legs. Now, the second thing, or the alternative, is to lift. And as we discussed in the first DVD, or the first instructional, when I lift my opponent, I can do it several different ways. The worst way to lift somebody is to lift with your back. I'm going to just keep them tight, and lift them like that. Like that. In other words, I'm using my back power here. Like that. That's the worst way to lift. A better way to lift, although I still don't think the best way, but a better way to lift is to simply get your hips down low, squat, and use your leg power. My legs and my hips are much more powerful in lifting. My view, though, that's probably not the best way. The best way is for me to pop my hips in, like we discussed in the very first DVD, such that momentum is going to take his hips out. And I can do that with as little energy as possible. And generally speaking, I would prefer not to lift if I can avoid it, because that's a fairly energy-dependent kind of motion. I would much rather typically chop and drive, because that's less energy on my part, and also it requires a tremendous amount of energy on my opponent's part just to be maintaining his balance there. So again, in my moves, my goal is to be as energy efficient as I can be, and to have my partner or opponent have to burn as much energy as he can. So if I'm going to lift, I'm going to do this type of position with my hips. I'm in tight, my hips are going to pop, his hips, that's going to make his hips go up. So if I'm in here, from this position, I typically step, because my hips are out now. I got to bring my hips in, so I'm going to step up. And I want you to notice as I'm practicing this, I would do this type of a motion, or at least this type of a hold, at once in a blue moon. Once, if I'm in here tight, and I pop in, there would be very, very few circumstances where I want to hold my opponent up. This is requiring a lot of energy on my part. Once I lift, my finish is going to be to pop him up, momentum takes him up, then I'm going to get out of the way and he's going to come down. So that at no point in that whole movement am I simply just supporting his weight with my muscles or my power. Okay, it's momentum, popping up. I'm going to lift once more and then I'll show finish from there. So from this position here, I'm in tight, I pop my hips in. Again. I want you to notice too, when I pop in, my feet, my heels go up, I'm up on my toes, again I'm arching back, and my hips are going to try to make contact with his hips. And the momentum will take him up and out. So, when I lift, from this position here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop my hips in, I'm going to get out from underneath. I'm going to hold on to this leg. I'm going to let go around the waist. I pop to this position here. I'm going to come down towards the head quickly. In wrestling, a very common type of technique is to lift that leg up and go for what's called a Turk. Submission wrestling or jiu-jitsu, that might not be so wise because basically you're allowing your opponent to get you in a half guard. But what I want to demonstrate primarily there is when I lift, I'm doing it with my hips. Also, I'm not holding my opponent up for any time. I lift and let him down. Lift and let him down. So his momentum is coming up. As soon as that momentum stops and comes down, I get out of the way. I hold on to the leg that I've controlled through the crotch, the arm that's around the rear, up through his crotch, the arm around the waist, gets out of the way. I'm here, up, this comes out, and I kind of get out of the way. And if I leave my arm up high after I've lifted, if his whole body wants to come down, but I'm holding his leg up, what's going to happen is his head's going to come down. He's going to have to defend against bashing his head on the mat by blocking with his hands. And that's what I'm going to count on. And at that point, I'm going to attack his head and I'm going to push his head down and try to drive through to bring him to the mat. From here, again, in freestyle wrestling, for example, the move would be like a Turk. I'm not so sure if that has that much applicability, though, with regard to submission wrestling or jiu-jitsu. Again, the top, I'm up on my toes, my back is arched, it's all momentum. I do not hold my opponent. He's up, and when I feel that weight coming back down, I get out of the way. And you can finish however you're comfortable in there. I don't want to get into that. My main point there is on the lifting technique. My opinion is it's better to lift with this type of a technique with my hips than simply with my legs. Although with your legs is not incorrect. I just think it's more efficient to lift with your hips.